Hi everybody, it's Adam from LUCIDPIXUL, and I wish you all a very happy new year. This is officially our first video of 2016, so for 2016, I wish you tons of awesome stuff. All right, now to kick off this first talk for the year, I'm very excited because I have a very special announcement. Now, this announcement doesn't have to do with LUCIDPIXUL, although I do have some cool stuff coming soon, so stay posted. This one actually has to do with something I love in equal abundance, and that is schoolism. Not only schoolism, but the college that I teach at. Because you might not know that I don't only have my online school, LUCIDPIXUL, but I also teach at a college, the CEGEP of Old Montreal. CEGEP in Quebec meaning college. Now, last year when I went to the Schoolism Workshop, I cannot praise my experience enough. I walked away from that workshop not being able to drive home fast enough to start painting. I got to meet Alex Wu. I got to meet one of my personal heroes, Carlo Ortiz. But I'm going to give you a quick rundown before we start a talk of who's going to be teaching there, who's going to be teaching in this workshop, and a little bit of a backstory of where these guys are from, without taking too much time, of course. So the first one that we have is DESMARCHELIER, who's going to be teaching the fundamentals of visual storytelling. And he's an illustrator and designer, illustrator, designer, and actually art director, who's worked at Universal Studios, Amblin, DreamWorks, Sony, and so forth. The second one is going to be GONZALES. Now, this is in no particular order, of course. He's a story artist from Pixar, namely from Pixar, and he has credits including Monsters, Inc., Incredibles, Finding Nemo, Ratatouille, and Brave. And he's going to be teaching gesture drawing, which is going to be phenomenal. The next one here is, of course, Mr. Nathan FOWKES, who's going to be teaching pictorial composition. And you know, his name speaks for itself, but he's a concept artist and teacher. He also teaches at Schoolism as well, who's, namely from DreamWorks, but has also worked at Blue Sky, Disney, all that kind of fun stuff, and beautiful, beautiful artwork. All right, the next one is Daniel ARRIAGA, who's going to be teaching character design. And he's a character designer from Pixar as well, who's worked on, again, Incredibles, Ratatouille, WALL-E, Up, Toy Story 3, and Wreck-It Ralph. Quite the credits here, these guys. Next is KRIS PEARN, of course, and he's going to be teaching storyboarding. And he's a story artist and art director who's worked on Open Season 1 and 2, Surf's Up, Hotel Transylvania, one of my personal favorites, or at least especially from an animator's perspective, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 1 and 2, two other phenomenal films, and Pirates, and so on and so forth. And last but not least is the famous Steven Silver, the character designer from who's worked all over the place. He's worked on Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, Clerk the Animated Series, Kim Possible, Danny Phantom, The Cleveland Show, and in case you don't know, Steven Silver also has his own art talks. Very not unlike what I do. His is called Art Talk, to make a distinction, although it's not a huge distinction. But if you want, you can go and check out his stuff as well. Now, I'm going to leave links to all of these artists and all of the info you're going to need to check out the Schoolism Workshop in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. In the case that you decide you want to head down to Montreal, do some sightseeing, and check out this wonderful workshop at the same time, or if you're from Montreal and you want to go and check it out as well. If you want to get any a discount on tickets, you can get in touch with me personally, because I'm going to be helping with that as well, and I have discount codes for anybody who's interested, so you can give yourself a little bit of a rebate if you're planning on going. Save yourself a couple of bucks. All right, so today, what are we going to talk about? Well, it's a big topic, and it's one that isn't talked about a lot. In fact, it's a huge source of stress to a lot of people, or success to others, and it has a huge impact on the stability of your career, depending on how you look at it. And that is the whole subject of working for studios versus working as a freelancer. I can say that I have a very good rounded understanding of both worlds, and what to expect and what is expected of you as an artist when you work in one of these two different types of environments. On the surface, your art is your art. How you work is the quality of your artwork, and the efficiency of your artwork is, of course, paramount. Right? That's the number one thing that's going to get you a job as a freelancer or working in a studio full time. However, that's about where the similarities end. Because from a working perspective, from an individual perspective, your personality can make you a better fit for one or a better fit for the other, depending on who you are, depending on a bunch of different factors. And you may, depending on what you're pursuing currently in your life, might be hitting certain roadblocks, not knowing why. The first thing is politics. This is the number one thing that people don't talk about but have to deal with. It's one of the things that have one of the greatest impacts on your job working in a studio, yet nobody ever talks about it. People tell you about the technical side of working in a studio, what's demanded of you, what the timelines are like, what kind of artwork is expected of you, what it's like to work with an artistic director, so on and so forth. But they don't tell you about that underlying factor that affects everybody's job. Now, this isn't exclusive to artists. This is universal for anybody working in an office type environment. You have to take into account something very important when it comes to being an artist, and that's the fact that it wasn't always like this for artists. Working in a studio environment is something quite new for artists, at least on the scale that it is today. And as long as I've been around, or most of the time since I've been around, studios have been a regular part of the artistic production pipeline, namely because I worked in animation. This is something I was very familiar with. And in animation is in essence a group effort. It is a team effort. It's not something that one person can pull off efficiently to any great degree. So it's generally an office-oriented type of work, or at least a studio-oriented type of work. Through the course of history, it has not been the same as it has been working in a law firm, or working for an engineering firm, or as a programmer, or any other type of job that requires you, customer service for instance, any other job that requires you to work in an office with lots of other people. That brings us to today. If we look at the way studios function today, in comparison to how artists and studios, they are completely worlds apart. The way it used to be was an artistic environment. What it's turned into today is far more of a business environment. The environment that you're going to see in many studios, game design studios, film studios, TV studios, animation studios, so on and so forth, are very much business oriented. They're run exactly the same way that a law firm would be run, or a customer service department would be run. Everybody gets their own cubicle. They get their computer. Depending on the budget of the studio, you're either working on Intuoses or you're working on Cintiqs. And you sit at your cubicle, you're handed your work to do, and you do it. It's production work, essentially. Your job is to be the background artist, the background colorist. You're supposed to do character design. You're the animator. You're the concept artist. You're the matte painter. That's your job, and you're given a batch of work, and you got to do it. And that's the way the company works. But in combination with that comes the politics, comes the competition, comes, depending on the personality of the studio, the bickering, the he said, she said, all of that kind of nonsense that goes on around any type of studio where you have to work with other people and you're all competing for the same type of work on a daily basis. When you spend enough time with people, after a certain amount of time, you get to know them personally. Depending on your personality, depending on the situation, you are generally always going to run into the situation where there's people you get along with more and people you get along with less. You might also run into the situation where you get along with everybody great and some people not so great, and in other studios where you can't stand anybody you work with. The politics of that studio sucks ass. And I've had a chance to work for both. I've worked for studios where I walked in and I felt loved and I felt respected, and I loved and respected my colleagues that I worked with and my peers, my colleagues, my employers. I just had a wonderful, warm, supportive environment. I've worked in other studios where I walked in and I got those toothy smiles at the beginning of the studio, and within 2 or 3 weeks, I started to quickly point out that that person, and that person are all gunning for my job, and they're all pissed off that I got promoted before they did, when they've been working there for a couple of years. And it was a cat and mouse game of people trying to discredit me to try to get me fired type of situation. I'm not saying this out of bitterness. This is the reality of life. This is the dog-eat-dog world that we live in sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. Depending on your particular personality, you might be able to navigate through those politics easily, or maybe not. You might find yourself being everybody's buddy and being the prize employee that everybody gets along with and getting promotions and everybody pats you on the back and tells you how awesome you are. And you might be the person who's stuck in the basement working in the back in the reject part of the studio and have a director come by and throw you their 2 comments. Or maybe you might be working in a studio where you don't even see your directors and colleagues. You're just sitting there in the dark schlepping away on your work, and every now and then you get an email from your director saying, you know, we need more of this. It can be, even though you're working in a studio, it can be a very lonely place, depending on the dynamics of the studio. You could be the type of person who has a very outgoing and energetic attitude, but you walk into a studio full of, well, let's say it like it is, elitist pricks, who, if you have the audacity of asking a technical question about how things work, they'll give you a sideways glance and answer everything you say with, as I said, blah, 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 okay? And you have to deal with that shit too, okay? Depending on your personality, this might work for you, it might not. Well, what determines how well you fit into that particular type of environment? Well, a lot of it has to do with A, how sociable you are, B, how shy you are or how outgoing you are, C, how honest you are or how good you are at being full of shit. All right? Now, the answers, the solution to some of these problems, these political problems that you might be dealing with in a studio, are not necessarily what you might think. For instance, is being shy or outgoing a better quality to have in a studio? Well, like any answer I'm going to give you, I'm going to tell you it's situational. That depends on the circumstances. Artists, or at least the art crowd, can be quite introverted, can be quite quiet. You come to work, you stick your noise-canceling earphones on, you sit there and you just work and you draw all day and you don't talk to anybody, except just to get up and go to the bathroom or hang out and have your lunch with somebody. Certain studios, certain types of people are shy and introverted. They're not very talkative. Certain studios have that kind of vibe. So if you walk in and go, hi, everybody. Hi, I'm Adam. Pleasure to meet you. Hey, bud, nice tie. Love the shoes. Have you lost weight, Brenda? You know what I mean? That kind of shit. People are going to look at you and go, who's this idiot? You know, you could that guy to shut up. We're trying to work. Right? That kind of thing. Other types of places. I've worked in other studios where all of the bosses in the studio made a point of A, screaming at the top of their lungs so everybody could hear them, and B, being as rude and profane as humanly possible. I'm not kidding you. I'd be working in a studio where the head bosses had this kind of air of, we're so accustomed to this place because we built it with our own 2 hands that we can express ourselves any way we want. We can walk in our pajamas, and when they talk and go, hey, how the fuck are you doing, Bob? And you can hear that. All 200 of us could hear them yelling that shit across the whole studio. Ha, fucking hell, look at this drawing. Oh, that's a piece of shit. You know, it was always situational. Certain studios are going to be a fit for the type of personality you have. Certain aren't. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. But this is such an important subject because depending on the circumstances, you might fit, you might not. Art doesn't always dictate whether or not you're going to keep your job. Sometimes, in fact, I would say more often than not, we already know you can draw well. It's your personality that determines whether or not you're going to A, get the job, but if you do, B, if you're going to keep it. Because if you're the type of, if there's a lot of kind of conniving, backstabbing going on in a studio, not to say that they're all like that, but it does exist in more abundance than I'd like to admit, then are you capable of keeping your mouth shut about it? Are you capable of navigating around that kind of stuff? I'm not telling you how to, because we'd be sitting here talking for the next six months. There's so many different situations you might have to deal with. Are you adaptable? Are you good at keeping your mouth shut? Are you good at hiding stress? These are things that you might be required of you working in a studio. I'm not saying that there's a solution to it. I'm just stating a reality to it. My personal opinion is, if you want to take your best bet, your best behavior bet to fitting in a studio, don't talk behind people's backs. That's never a cool thing to do. No, don't get caught up in the bickering. If there's bickering going on and somebody comes to you and say, hey, Adam, you know that I heard that Tony was really being a real dick to Sophie, and it was really da-da-da. And Sophie can't draw really well. Did you see Sophie? She's not really that good. She doesn't really fit into the studio. If they do that, my answer to that is, oh, that sucks, man. Well, you know, good luck with that. Get back to your drawing. I don't get involved. I don't, because as soon as you acknowledge somebody's bickering, they expect you to be their sounding board every time they want to bitch, and then that gets through the studio and people start to hear it. So stay clear. Just, and if they're really insistent about saying, you know what, honestly, I don't want to be part of that conversation. I don't like gossip. I'm not a big gossip person. I'd rather just get along with people. Keep it simple and stupid. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if you really, really, really can't stand your job and you're ready to go, start looking for work now. Don't complain. Don't try to solve anything first. Look for new work first. Keep your mouth shut. That's one thing that really honestly makes a big difference. You're always going to run into problems. 99% of problems are solved by avoidance, in my personal opinion. I have found myself in situations where I tried to tackle a situation head on and be very verbal about it. In other situations where I just let it go and I didn't make an issue about it. And I found that percentage-wise, the times where I didn't make an issue about it and I just focused on my work were the times that I walked out of there with the least scars. Okay? So that's my personal advice to you. Work hard, keep a professional attitude, rest well, be healthy, do a good job, collect your pay. And be friendly, be kind to people. If there's outings, if there's, like in Montreal, they call them 5 à 7, which means 5 to 7s, like after hours parties or get-togethers for a drink with your colleagues and stuff, always go. Never be the person who's like, I'm not in the mood. Unless of course it's an after hours drink with the accounting department that you really couldn't give a rat's ass about. But it's important for you to be a part of that team. If you're excluded, if the less of a connection you have to the people you work with, the more expendable you are. It's like if somebody was walk up to you and say, here's this man and here's that man, you decide which one dies. You pick. Kind of a very macabre kind of Sophie's Choice type of situation. That guy I've never met and I have no idea who he is. That guy said hi to me when he walked in the building and he opened the door for me when I walked by him. Well, kill him, save him. I have a connection with him, so it's harder for me on a personal level to sacrifice that guy. I know I'm using a very fatalistic type of example, but that's what I mean. You want that. You want the more of a connection you create with your colleagues, the better. All right, that's number one. Politics. Deal with it, or don't. Sometimes certain people just don't fit in the studio environment. For one reason or another. Sometimes it's because they've got a shitty personality. Sometimes it's because they're too nice. And sometimes, and I'm not saying anybody in particular, but I've heard the stories of, and have experienced in my own right, the stories from many well-known artists out there in the industry who are doing extremely well for themselves, that if you really read between the lines and if you actually pay attention to what they're telling you, you'll realize that what they're telling you is they weren't a good fit for studios. That doesn't mean they were unprofessional or unqualified. They're 10 more times more qualified than most of the artists out there. But they weren't necessarily a healthy fit for the studio environment. Probably, in my opinion, because of politics. And a lot of these people ended up realizing at a certain point in their career that maybe a studio isn't the place for me. To actually realize that there are other options in this world than working in that studio is a pretty eye-opening experience. But very often, or more often than not, it's an experience that we only experience, or we only realize through trial and error and our own self-discovery at a certain point. And that's important. Maybe you have worked tooth and nail and worked your ass off to try to fit into studios and try to be the right type of personality and try to be outgoing and try to be talkative and try to be quiet and try to navigate all of this bullshit. And you keep finding yourself at the short end of the stick and you're very discouraged about it. Maybe it's not because you're not good enough. Maybe it's because you're not fit to work in a studio setting. As artists, if we come back to the core of what this conversation is all about, as artists, we're not really designed to work in an office type environment. Studio, yes, but not a modern idea of a studio. I'm comparing classic artistic studios to, which were generally not occupied by a lot of artists in the first place. They were very exclusive, right? Versus the office environment. And studios, what people call studios today, they only call them studios because there's artists working in them. But I wouldn't call it a studio. I wouldn't call what we get 99% of the time a studio. I call it an office. And are you the office type? Now, although the only distinguishing factor between an artist and let's say a customer service representative for a telecommunications company is the fact that in one of the buildings they wear ties and the other one they don't, that's it. The politics and the way business is conducted is the same way. Does that suit you? Is that what you're about? Is that how you grew up? Is that what does that fit into your belief system as an individual? Well, I'm pretty sure that for the majority of us out there, it's not. We don't fit into that. That's not built into the DNA of artists. Think about it. There's an old expression that I love that I've heard quoted a million times. And this isn't anything against the other party that I'll be mentioning in this quote. Lawyers use lies to hide the truth. Artists use lies to uncover them. I've always loved that quote. What does that mean? Well, that means that in order for an artist to really discover themselves, discover their style, discover where their place, discover their genius as artists, they first have to discover themselves. And to discover themselves, they have to make a living, they have to make a conscious effort every single day of their lives to pursue the raw, visceral truth of life in themselves and in everybody else, and formulate their own interpretation of it in an artistic way. Their artistic interpretation is the lie, but that lie is always used to uncover the truth. We live in an environment where honesty, or at least we have the type of career where trueness of self and honesty is at the core of who we are as artists. It kind of has to be, to a certain degree. When it comes to living and experiencing and feeling and conveying that into our artwork, we have to be strongly connected with emotion, with mood, with thought, with feeling, with our physical environment. One of our biggest obstacles as artists is being able to silence our mind and see with our eyes, right? Where our brain is always telling us what we think things are supposed to look like, we have to train ourselves to see with our eyes and see things every day with fresh eyes as they are, as they actually exist. And then you take somebody like that and you throw them into a box full of people that are completely and utterly full of shit. Of course, I'm being very emphatic about this. Not everybody in a studio is full of shit. I've worked with some fabulous people. But there are that bullshit, dishonest, political, backtop, conniving, plotting, gossip is a part of the office environment. How well does a very trained, honest artist fit into that type of mentality? In many cases, not so well. And very often the ones who do thrive are the ones who are cocksuckers, to be completely honest with you. I've seen in a lot of environments, a lot of different types of office environments where it's the sleaziest ones that get by the furthest. There's always the ones that are lacking a little bit of personality, to be completely honest with you, that end up striving. People who can do the same mundane, repetitive work every single effing day of their lives and are very, very good at not only navigating politics, but creating a shit ton of it themselves. And I very often see people that strive in that. In that type of environment, and I'm talking about big studios, I'm not talking about the little ones, I'm talking about the big ones. You have to deal with that. If you can't deal with it, you get sacked. If you get sacked, then you start to get really down on yourself because you just lost what you believe is a great opportunity. From my experience, not so great. Not as great as you might think. I've reached certain, gold bar standards in my own career, and that gold bar wasn't as gold as I thought. I realized it was just gold plated. It was cheap fake gold that left a rash around your neck. So that's a little bit of food for thought. However, I've also worked in small studios where I was working with the most humanitarian, inspiring, loving, supportive, selfless people I've ever known, and are some of my best friends to this day, and I will cherish them and I will boast about them till the day I die. Okay? You just have to take that into account. Now, let's flip the coin and look at freelancing, being an independent artist? Well, number one, you don't have that much politics to deal with. I'm working primarily as, well, I'm working entirely as a freelancer right now, minus when I teach at the college, right? And even that's a very independent job because it's just me, right? I don't have anybody telling me what to do. I'm the one teaching, right? But as a freelancer, working for Fantasy Flight and teaching my online school, I'm completely independent in that regard. So I'm working from home. I've got my whole setup here. I'm all set up and I get my work done. I have my clients get in touch with me. They send me the work that they want to get done. I produce the work for them. I ship it. They might make a call back for a few little minor corrections. I send the corrections and then that's it. And the check comes in. The check comes in later on. Okay. That's how my work works. I don't have to deal with politics. I don't have to deal with it because there's very little interaction between me and my clients. I have a lot of interaction between me and my students, but that's a difference. That's not the same. That's not at all the same. The relationship between a student and a teacher is a very close and trusting one. But I'm independent. I'm very independent. Now, some people absolutely love it. I, for one, absolutely love it. Why do I love working as a freelancer? Well, taking all the hard work out of it, just looking at the actual energy of my type of work involves. Number one is that I create through my talks, through my school, through my teaching, through my interactions with my clients, my own ecosystem, my own energy. One that is very inclusive, one that is very non-judgmental. And I've had students for every imaginable walk of the planet. I've seen it all. I like that belief of mine filtering through into whatever it is that I create, whoever it is I get involved with. There's something else though. There's something that a lot of people might really, really struggle with. And that is, number one, there's no set structure to my working environment. Nobody's telling me what to do. Nobody's telling me when to do it. Nobody's telling me that I need to succeed. Nobody tells me that I need to fail. I'm completely and utterly on my own to make those decisions for myself. And that in and of itself can be a very, very unsettling feeling. Where do I start? Think about it. One of the big advantages of working in a studio that a lot of people gravitate towards is the fact that you don't have to do any of the work looking for the clients. That's the PR department. That's the art director. That's the HR department. That's their job. They have other people in charge of handling the money, of paying the bills, of paying the taxes, of taking care of the benefits, of bringing in the clients, of delegating the work, of whatever. You don't have to do any of that. You just sit down at your desk. You don't have to pay for any of the equipment. It's all provided for you. There's your computer. There's your login. There's all your stuff. Now draw. And that's a lot easier. Plus, generally speaking, when you're working in a studio, at the beginning at least, right out of the gate, generally you're going to get paid better than when you're working as a freelancer. Because as a freelancer, work only trickles in very slowly. And you slowly have to gain a momentum and gain a reputation with your clients and all that kind of stuff. You're saving yourself a whole lot of headache. When you're working freelance, when you're working as an independent artist, you have to seek the work. You have to organize your day. You have to set a schedule. You have to set your own standards. That's not an ideal situation for a lot of people. However, as artists, if you think about it in the long run, if you had to choose between the two, it makes sense why I hear more and more artists nowadays gravitating towards working as an independent freelancer or an independent entrepreneur, building their own thing. When that opportunity presents itself, they very often, more often, tend to gravitate towards, I want to be a freelancer, I want to be independent, because they recognize the fact that they're different from everybody else, and they might not fit into the studio. So, what am I doing? Am I painting a very biased, one-sided perspective of freelance versus studio? No. What I'm doing is that I'm painting a distinction between the two, the pros and the cons of both situations. There is an equal abundance of pros and cons in both sides. In one case, you have the independence, You have the ability to grow at your own speed. You have the ability to create the kind of working environment that you're both physically and emotionally comfortable with. But at the same time, you have to deal with balancing your own budget, calculating your own taxes, worrying about your own benefits, how to insure yourself properly, how to get clients, how to promote yourself, how to be a little bit of your own personal PR agent, when you need to go and find an external PR agent, when you need to get an accountant, so on and so forth. Maybe you need an agent, that kind of idea, depending on the type of work you go. So that can be very stressful for a lot of people. For me personally, I love it. If you're new to the industry, if you're brand new and you haven't experienced either or, maybe you're still a student, my advice to you is do both. But if you were looking for a paycheck, if you need to pay your bills, then I strongly suggest that you aim for the studio work first. All right? Namely because you haven't developed a name for yourself yet and you don't understand yet. You haven't had enough of an idea of the professional pipeline. You need to gain a little bit of that experience first. So I suggest doing the studio stuff first, but at the same time, I've had students straight out of college that have gone straight into their own business, right out of the gate. My second piece of advice to you is give things a chance. You might walk into a studio and have an absolutely horrible experience. You might try freelancing and have an absolutely horrible experience. Nothing ever, or very seldom, works the first time around. You need to try things out. You need to... Working in a studio isn't a single thing. Every single time you work in a different place, every single time you work for a different client, it's a different experience. You learn to navigate the good and the bad and pick the lesser of two evils in the end. And you find that environment where you find you thrive most. I've already found mine. It took me a long time to find it. But I never had anybody, like I'm doing for you right now, sit down and say, Adam, why don't you try this and try this? I tried one, had my share of experiences, tried the other, had another share of experiences, and came to my own conclusions about it. It's up to you to decide for yourself. But if you find yourself being an advanced artist, somebody who's been in the industry for a long time, and you've dealt with lots of frustrations, lots of layoffs, or you've been fired several times, or you keep getting that... Your boss keeps telling you you don't fit into the company culture, which is a euphemism for you don't navigate politics very well, and you keep dealing with that obstacle and you're very down on your career, maybe you weren't designed for studios all along. And maybe it's time for you to really start to take your skill, take everything that you've spent all of these years developing and build your own thing with it. Build your own business, where instead of you going and chasing after other people, instead you bring people to you. All right. I hope you enjoyed my talk. With that said, I've only had my own little share of experiences down my own career path, but you've probably had your own. And I'm very curious to know, have you ever had any difficult situations that you've dealt with, either working in a studio or working as an independent freelancer? And if you did, how did you navigate yourself through that? So if you do have any valuable feedback to share with everybody, don't forget to leave a comment below. And as a quick reminder, remember on the 12th and 13th of March, we have the Schoolism Workshop in Montreal. So you can check the link below for more information. And if you're interested in buying a ticket to go and check it out for yourself, which I highly recommend, you can get in touch with me personally and I have a discount code for you. All right. So thank you very much for watching and don't forget to like and subscribe.